All right, so this is our second study in the sevens of John here. So last week we just went through basically what all these sevens are. There's 7 signs, there's 7 named disciples, there's 7 women that are mentioned. There's 7 Aramaic statements, 7 I am statements with descriptions, 7 I am statements with no descriptions. There are other 7s that I don't think will bother, we might mention them in passing down the road, but there's the likes of the 7 ministries of the Spirit, the 7 questions that Pilate asked, and all these different things. So, but what we're going to do here, there's a book that I've been reading a little bit called The 7 Sevens of John, and it's written by a woman called, she's Finnish, and so it's like Samitha or something like that, Smothers. Big a lot of S's in there. But anyway, she wrote this book called The 7 Sevens of the Gospel of John, and it's not a particularly theologically deep book, but it's a good devotional book. So so if you're in, I got it on Kindle, so it was cheap. It was only £4, whereas the book itself cost about 12. So it is available on Amazon if you want to look at it. So but one thing that that woman does is she looks at the 7 miracles or 7 signs and lines them up with the 7 I am statements. So I think, and I like what she sort of brings out of that. So that's what we're going to do is with the 7 signs and the 7 I am statements, is we're going to weave them together because they fit nicely together. So so today, as we talk about the turning the water into wine, which is the first sign, that is parallel with Jesus being the true vine. So where he says, I am the true vine. Now, we won't get deeply into that particular I am statement. We'll do that next week. So we'll go kind of backward and forward like that. And then, of course, as we do these stories, we'll then be seeing the 7 named disciples sort of being tossed in the mix here and there. But we'll then revisit those particular disciples in more detail as we go along. So the 7s that we're going to be dealing with are not going to be done necessarily in nice little clumps and groups. It'll be kind of jumping around a little bit, but I'll try to keep you all straight. So just switch on my little vision flip.
What do you say, Carol?
It's a good thing you're sitting there and she's sitting there, you know, so.
Buck stupid, apparently. Buck stupid.
That's what I was thinking.
Another good book that I've been referencing in regard to this, the Gospel of John, is the What the Bible Teaches series by that series is written by a whole lot of different people. It's a commentary series, but this was wrote by John Hedding or J Hedding, sorry, and but very, very good sound stuff, you know. So you know, if you like brethren these things, so but anyway, so we're going to be looking at the turning the water into wine, and this is the what is referred to as the first sign. Now, Libby had pointed out last week, which was a good comment. It's like you said something to the effect of, you know, what's the difference between a miracle and a sign? You asked a question in and around that kind of idea. So and so as because sometimes we think a miracle and a sign in the Bible is the same thing. It kind of is, but mostly isn't. Okay, so so we'll look into that. So let's see if this is going to work. Here we go. Okay, so this is the first sign or miracle, and let's just look at the chapter 2, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, which is where the story is. Again, this series is not a verse by verse commentary of like we did with Chronicles. This is going to be sort of jumping around a bit because the signs, go from say, chapter 2 here, and then goes into the end of chapter 4, and then goes to chapter 5, and then there's one in chapter 6, and and then chapter 9, and so it jumps around a bit. But so the first couple of verses here says, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding, and when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour is not yet come. His mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. Now there were 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. And Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have drunk well, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now. This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this, he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay many days. So let me just make a quick comment here before I sort of delve into some other sorts of notes. It says there on the third day there was a wedding. Okay. Now, in the Bible, it doesn't talk about, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's where you sort of talk about days. So you look at that and you say, okay, on the third day. Now, when you look at John, and back into the first chapter, it talks about the next day and the following day. And so there was a very quick succession of things that went on. So if you backpedal a little bit into those days that are talked about in the Bible, Andrew and Peter became disciples of Jesus on the first day, and then Philip and Nathaniel were on the following day, and then this happens. So now, what days of the week were they? Well, weddings generally happened on Tuesday for Jews. Now, the reason for that is because in the creation narrative, God said of the third day of creation, which is when there was the land that was made. Okay, there was the water was collected in one place, and then there was dry land. God said of that particular day that it was good, and he said it was good twice. So, all the other days, with the exception of one, he said, and God saw that it was good. Now, he did not say about the second day, however, which was the separation of the waters, the sky and the sea and that kind of thing. He actually didn't say that was good, which is strange. But on the third day, that was good twice. So the Jews thought that's a good day to get married. So that's where some of that is sourced. So the third day here is Tuesday. So now I think the reason that they were invited to this particular wedding was because Cana is where Nathaniel's from. And we learn that later on in the gospel, where it talks about Nathaniel of Cana. So this is probably some of his relations or his friends or something like this. But it's amazing how quickly this all pulls together. I mean, we're only talking about a handful of days, you know. So now let's pull out the characters in the story. If you remember when we did the studies in Matthew 8 and 9, you know, with all those different miracles and different things that went on with Jesus, it was important to identify who was in the story, okay? Because sometimes we read things so quickly that we just go, yeah, well, yeah, Jesus is in there. I think the disciples and yeah, crowds. Was there somebody else? You know, so let's, you know, let's pull all this together so we know who's in the story and who's not. All right. So the first person that's actually mentioned is Mary. So now there's an interesting little thing that comes as a result of Mary being first, but then we realize then through the story that Mary then takes very much a back seat. And that's the last you hear of her in terms of her making a statement. Now we see Mary throughout the gospel. We see her at the cross. Christ was dying, but we do not see her speaking. The actual last time she ever spoke that's recorded is here.
You see, that story right is pressed upon me that when she said, you know, this is my son, do what he says.
Yeah.
It's kind of moved to her that Jesus has given her authority, you know,
Yeah.
as in saying, do what.
Yeah, I've had a word with my son, so you do what he says.
Yes,
Yeah.
so then that's why we should be worshiping her, because she has authority. That, yeah.
Yeah. No. Yes, they. When I used to teach in Catholic school, I don't tell everybody that. You know, some hardcore Protestants, you know, if I said that I used to teach in Catholic school, then it would be excommunicated. So, but when I taught in Catholic school, we had a fundraiser, and so I went to this thing, and you know, everybody knew I was not involved. It was like, you know, the Church of the Protestant. But they had a Mariologist priest guy come and speak at this thing, and he started, you know, speaking and pontificating about Mary and all this kind of stuff. And I said to myself, I'm going to go rattle this man's cage, you know, afterwards. So I went and did that, you know, and I wasn't nasty, you know, I just says, you know, I'm interested in what you're saying here, but I struggle with it, you know, because, you know, I'm not. And and he said, well, I'd like to send you some books about this. And I was like, okay, you send me books and I will read them. He sent me a pile of books about Mariology and all that worship of Mary and the Mary cult and all this stuff. And I tried, I really did. I got through the first 2 chapters of this book and said, this is completely out of matter space somewhere. I don't know where this is coming from, but I put the book down. Yeah, because it just took things out of the Bible and twisted them all over the place.
Yeah.
So
when you don't read the Bible, then you can just listen to anybody.
That's right. You see, in the Catholic system, they tell you, don't read the Bible. Listen to the priest, because the priest is the one who is the interpreter of these things.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so, but Mary is a very, very important character. Let's not take Mary and go and fire her down the road, you know, because she's an essential character, not only in this story, but in the life of Christ being brought up, you know.
She was chosen.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the things that Mary says and her, you know, statements around the conception and the birth and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the theology that she has and understands is that really quite amazing. But you know, but in that Magnificat, which they refer to as her, you know, song, that is after the Annunciation, she refers to God as her Savior. Okay, so yeah,
the Annunciation is when she's brought down like Jesus. We're told that's your worshiping her. Like we didn't die like a normal death.
Oh yes, the assumption of Mary. The assumption of Mary. Yeah, they say, yeah.
That's glorifying her a whole different.
Yeah. Well, that one. The reason they have this doctrine of the assumption of Mary is because Mary didn't sin, so therefore Mary couldn't have died.
Yeah.
So
Well,
she
I've
had to
only
be-
just realized then that, you know, obviously Mary and Joseph did consummate their marriage because they had other brother Jesus and other
Oh, yeah.
brothers and
Sure.
sisters.
Yeah.
Wow, that was my blowing.
Yeah, right, yeah, yes. Yeah, but because the Catholics will totally dismiss that.
You see,
You know,
I'm
they-
like,
you know, they'll say,
just
they'll say,
divide
they'll say that the Bible talks about Jesus' brothers and sisters, but they say, well, what it really means is his cousins. No, no, that's wrong. So anyway, right, the next character is, okay, Jesus himself. I am taking these as they come in the story, okay? So not in regard to importance, but sort of like you see in movies, in order of appearance. There's the disciples that are mentioned. Now, again, in the Gospel of John, there's 7 named disciples, but it does talk about 12. So I would say at this particular juncture, you have the swap. And then there's the servants that are talked about, because Mary talks to the servants, and then the servants, they're the ones that actually are let in on a bit of a secret, you know, as to what's going on, because the master of the feast, he didn't know what was going on. He just was like, what's happening here? You know, so, and then there's the bridegroom, because the master of the feast has a conversation with the bridegroom. Now, the bridegroom is not, he doesn't say anything in the story, but he is obviously spoken to. So, so that's the main characters. That's sorry about that. Now, in the last verse that we read there in verse 12, it does mention Jesus' brothers, but that's not part of the story of the sign, though. So but I put that in because of a little caveat that I'll tell you about in a minute. Okay, right. Points to understand. This whole miracle versus sign thing. Okay. Now, a miracle, as is translated from the Greek there, which is dunamis, that means ability and power. But that particular word is not used in the Gospel of John. So what you find in the rest of the Gospels that's translated as miracle is a demonstration of power. It is a demonstration of God's ability to do something that's, in this case, somewhat out of the ordinary, you know. So, so we'll not look at, even though these are things that are miracles, they are things that are extraordinary. They are an exhibition of power, but they go beyond that. It's not just a thing that happens. So there is then this word sign, which is the Greek word and so semeion or something like that. So which is the translation of that being sign is probably the best thing, which means it is a thing that you read, it is a thing that you see, and it has a meaning. You know, because when you look at a sign, whether it's on the road or in here or whatever, you know, it's words that have a meaning. Okay, so even a picture that is a sign has a meaning. So that so this is not just something that's happening; it's something that has a meaning behind it. So it's looking beyond the actual works of power to see the distinct spiritual meanings to which the events are pointing. So I know that sounds like a bit of a handful. I took that from that, what the Bible teaches book, some of that words. So so what John is doing, because John says clearly in the gospel, he says, these were written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ and you'll have life through his name. So so these particular things are signposts. These are things that are telling you a deeper spiritual truth. You know, it's not just God coming and saying, right, hey, I can turn water into wine. Wow, Yeah, well, yeah, okay, wow, yeah, that is something, but it's not just that. It is, what does it mean? What is the point? Because, John was saying Jesus is deep. Jesus wants to tell you things, teach you things that are of great spiritual depth. So, when I was hearing Jeffrey Ward speak on Monday or Sunday night, I didn't get my days mixed up, Thursday, whatever. He was talking about the Philippian jailer getting saved. And he says, "What must I do to be saved?" And really made it out to be a quite a deep theological, spiritual question. And now Paul gives a theological response, which is believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. Okay, now, but the thing is if you look at that story in its entirety, your jailer is not really having any great thoughts about spirituality. He is caught up in a very practical sort of problem, which is there's an earthquake, the doors have fallen off their hinges, the prisoners are free to go, and that creates a problem for him because if the prisoners go, it's his head on the block. Now, Paul does say, don't kill yourself, we're all here. So it sort of solves that particular problem. But when he says, sirs, what must I do to be saved? Really what he's saying is, sirs, what must I do to be spared so that my job is okay? Because that's what he was fearful about. Because he didn't want his head chopped off. And so that was a physical, practical issue. That was not the guy wasn't thinking about, what must I be, to be saved in order to not go to hell or something like that. I don't think that was on the guy's mind. So, but what Paul was then demonstrating, believing on the Lord Jesus Christ, he's saying, look, Jesus is interested in the totality of your life, including your job.
Why do so many preachers preach that way? That's the way I always believed.
Yes, and I think what they're saying is true. What they're saying is right, but I don't think it goes far enough. And that's why it's so important to take the time and say, well, let's develop this story and find out what's going on. But because when we get to John chapter 5, this is the miracle of the man that was healed by the pool of Bethesda. Jesus uses a very interesting line with him, an interesting question. He says, now in King James, it would say, wilt thou be whole? Word whole is a pretty loaded word, So now the other translations, like the New King James, would say, do you want to get better? You want to be healed. But the word that's used there is a very, very physical word. It has nothing to do with holistic, spiritual healing or something like that. It's just like, but you're sick. Do you want to get physically sorted out? So Jesus is starting with them at a very, very practical level. And but isn't that wonderful that Jesus comes to where you are and then brings you along? Jesus is not down the road somewhere going, well, if you can catch up with me, that's dead on.
So your intentions maybe aren't pure at the start, but as you go along in the journey.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that's a wonderful thing about God. God looks at your motives, and sometimes our motives for getting saved or getting sorted out are slightly ulterior.
Yeah.
But God knows our heart, and God knows what He wants to do with us, and so He brings us along, and then Christ then figures into them things. But anyway, so that's the difference between the miracle and the sign. Okay, so anytime John talks about these miracles, they're actually these signs. Okay, they're looking beyond just the power. Okay, now the purpose of this sign is in verse 11. where it says Jesus manifested his glory. So, because the things that John is highlighting in his gospel, these are the purposes, so, is one, Jesus is manifesting his glory. In other words, he's demonstrating that he is God. When he's talking about glory, that's an attribute of God. And then Jesus' disciples believed. Okay, so now it's through the disciples' testimony that we believe. Because we have the Gospel of John. John believed what he wrote. He believed who the Lord Jesus Christ was, and then he wrote that down for the benefit of you and me. So, could you imagine if all we were was log of dew in the ocean, and and we had no word and nobody spoke to us? Praise God that God speaks to us. Now, Jesus also established his authority over nature.
Fine. Thank you, Helen. Fine.
Okay. Okay. Because in a lot of these stories, and we'll see this, is that Jesus is demonstrating his authority over a variety of things. And here in particular, he is demonstrating his authority over nature because he is actually short-circuiting a transition, that usually takes quite a long time. But he is using that demonstration to actually then say, I'm the true vine. Where we're talking about wine and that kind of thing, but what is that really talking about? What does that mean? And he's also demonstrating this particular thing in the context of a wedding too, so which is not by accident.
Well, this is probably a stupid question, really, but you see that wine, is that alcoholic wine?
We will get there. You stay tuned, so hang in there, sister, you're all right. So the other purpose here is I believe that Jesus is validating marriage, because in a lot of weddings you'll hear this passage read, because it is the one time where Jesus is at a wedding, so now he's not involved in the officiating at the wedding or any of those kinds of things, but the fact that he's there, demonstrates that getting married is a good thing, or and especially in the context between a man and a woman. See, in our day and age, it's between men and women and cats and dogs and trees and and all kinds of madness. I mean, you can get married to a tree over in France, so. Or a bridge.
Oh, the Eiffel Tower.
Oh, right, okay, happy days. So, I want that. So, okay. Now, Jesus takes prominence over Mary. Okay, I want you to see this. If you have your Bible open here, if you look at chapter 2, and verse 1, it says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. First person who is mentioned in this story is Mary, and then it talks about now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. Mary initially has prominence, but if you look then at verse 12, it says after this, so after the wedding, so after this miracle, after this sign, he went down to Capernaum, or he went down to Capernaum, Jesus, his mother, his brothers, his disciples, and so on. So who's first in the list? Jesus. So there is this subtle transference of prominence where Jesus is now in front. So, beforehand, Mary would have been, the mother that was bringing him up and that kind of thing. So he was under the authority, as it were, of his of his mother as a parent, but now that's changing. He is prominent. He has authority. So, and I'm dealing with a lot of people here in recent weather, of people who don't like authority. Just can't cope with it. You know, so as soon as that's challenged, you know, they blow up and F and blind and all this kind of stuff. And I was talking to somebody there the other day who I had heard the F word more times in that one conversation than I have in my life. So, you know, but anyway, you know, this is the kind of stuff we cope with. So Mary's last statement in John is this: whatever he says to you, do it. That's the last time you hear anything from Mary. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. You know, Mary pondered these things in her heart. She knew who Jesus was. So, and what a great exit line. You know, verse 5. You know, whatever he says, you do that.
That's where it stops, but then that's where we were taught that it fell off. That's where we were taught.
Yeah, but you know, and how backwards is that? It's like that's where it stops, and but yet they're saying, okay, well then Mary has all this.
Yeah.
Anyway. So, right. Now let's process through the miracle or sign of it. Okay. So the situation, which was a wedding celebration with a need. Okay. Now, I think all the guests and everybody, now you must understand that weddings lasted not a couple of hours back in those days, they lasted days. Okay. They ran out of wine quite quickly. So this was a problem that was noticed by Mary. Now, I don't think everybody else knew or understood. They were just, you know, they're just in there for the practice, you know, doing things and having fun and whatever. And but Mary sort of saw the situation and then says, you know, Jesus, you know, that they have this wine, you know. So she knew that Jesus could do something about it. But then Jesus, you know, responds to it and says, you know, woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour is not yet come. You know,
Excuse me, but is that not a bit rude for that?
Well, people have looked at that particular verse and think it's rude because of it. It sounds a bit sort of abrupt. Jesus is being congenial. He's actually being nice. Now, we would look at that and maybe look at it as being abrupt. Now, I sit with people from other cultures, and there are some cultures out there that appear abrupt.
Right.
But they're not being abrupt. That's just that's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's how they operate. You know, so but you know, people not of that culture, then they listen to that and they go, God, you know, what are you talking about? You know, but they're not being brash. That's just how they are. So, but
It's a bit like the statement we're throwing the dogs.
yeah.
But is that not sort of putting him in a position where I might be wrong, but Mary was sort of trying to run the show? Is that not Jesus sort of saying,
Well,
you should know who I am?
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think Mary could be, a little bit, since she knows things where a lot of other people don't know things, she might be kind of trying to hasten this along or push it along. And Jesus is going, no, we're doing things for my timetable, not yours.
Because I'm thinking, like, if you were a young girl who had been the angel that came and said, you're going to have a baby, and this baby was going to be God.
Yeah.
I would tend to not be telling, you'd be bringing it up, but you would be not ordering it to do things, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I thought myself that Jesus maybe just
correcting
her in a certain way.
Yeah.
You know?
So
A typical woman, Kev.
Yeah. Well, I didn't like to say that.
You do need to
There's too many about here.
What I noticed here is that there's two men here, two men there, and then there's a pile of women. So,
And where you stuck in the middle there?
I'm over
Is
the
there
referee. Anyway, but it's, but anyway, there is a need. There is a problem, okay? And it is a problem that, if not addressed, is going to descend into a very embarrassing sort of situation, because if you run out of your wine, you're like, you know, and the bridegroom is responsible for this.
So
Okay,
it was necessary in a wedding in them days to have wine.
yes. Yeah, so, because that was your
Well,
celebratory drink, okay? Now,
Would it,
yes,
it says like, you know, Jesus said to her, woman,
yeah,
that was his mother.
yeah, yes. Now,
He said, mother.
no, yes, and I understand that, and that's where
Agree
we,
with me,
yeah, that,
you know what I mean?
yes, and this is where we get this thing in our heads that it's abrupt and somewhat nasty sounding. Anyway, you know, so, but Jesus is not being abrupt or
No,
nasty.
no.
He's making a clear statement of, look, you know, you're not in charge, no harm to you, but, you know, this is the business, you know, so I'm okay, you're okay, everybody's okay, you just watch. So,
He has everything.
Yeah.
okay, now, what we're gonna do next week is then compare this to John 15, where we have the I am statement, I am the true vine, okay, because it's in the life of the fruit that there is life. And now, one of this particular passage of John 2 is one that I get thrown in my face constantly, you know, where they say, well, didn't Jesus turn water into wine? So therefore we can drink, you know, dead on, you know, so let's talk about that. Let's work through that, because on the surface, that looks like Jesus is legitimizing drink. Okay, is that what's going on? Stay tuned. Okay. So Mary highlights the need. She says they have no wine. Now, let's talk about wine then and wine now. Now, wine then, as the Bible describes wine, uses that word, and especially if it was good wine, did not have one drop of alcohol in it.
Really?
No. It was really good grape juice.
Yes. Religious.
Now, when they talk about, so the good grape, it was good grape juice first at in the wedding exercise. Then eventually what they called the inferior wine was then served up. Now, the inferior wine was starting to get a bit off.
And what about new wine with it? What's new wine?
Well, new wine and good wine,
But same.
same, yeah.
This is slur.
I think the bit that throws people is says, and then when they were drunk a lot.
Yeah.
It doesn't say drunk a lot, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah.
That they were thinking whenever these guys are so.
Yeah, sort of let's.
Full, throw them in the
They were full.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but when they talk about the inferior wine was stuff that was starting to get a little bit acrid, a little bit bitter. And that was because there was a natural process of fermentation that was starting to take place, because they didn't have any refrigeration back then.
So then it was turned into alcohol.
It was.
Yeah.
So, but that was
The
that was the bad bit, and that was later in the party.
Kicking out.
Yeah. So, yeah, so don't let the door hit you on the way out, you know, so.
So the good wine, you could not, it wouldn't affect you.
You,
You're
no, you
drunk
could not
or
get
anything,
drunk off of good wine.
But they could with the inferior.
They could. Now, wine, because of the technology of things back then, the really the best that you could get in alcohol terms back then was probably between 4% and 6%, which is quite minimal compared to your stuff that's served up today. Yeah, I mean, if you go and get a bottle of Buc-ee's or some other sort of just, standard issue wine, they're talking between 6 and 12%. And they did not have the technology to distill back then, which would be generating the spirits and that kind of thing, which would be, venturing into, very high percentages of alcohol. If you go to bottle of booze, it'll not say necessarily, it will say about percentages, but it'll also talk about proof. One proof is 0.5%. So if you go to a chemist and you get a bottle of Danilin, cough bottle, that's 35% alcohol. So that's 70 proof. That's pure legal. As they say in Ballymena, that's pure legal change.
Yeah, so
So,
could you get, would that affect you at top bottle?
well, if you drank the whole thing, yeah. Now, if you just take a little spoonful of it, it's not, the reason alcohol is in cough bottles. Now, they are coming out with cough bottles now where they don't have alcohol in them. So, but the reason that the alcohol is in there is to preserve the medication, so the medication doesn't go off. So,
Would that not affect an alcoholic?
yes. So people that are on medication to keep them from drinking, because when you, yeah, so, now, I knew people in America that were addicted to cough bottles. What they would do is they would go to the chemist because in America, the cough bottles are not behind the counter. Okay, they're just on the shelf. So you just go up to the shelf and what guys would do is you go there and look around for the counters and then go, crack it open and then sort of look around, make sure that they were not at the right angle for the camera, connect the whole thing, and then put the cap back on, sit back and shut it. Yeah, fine. So, they weren't buying anything. Anybody know about saline and morphine?
Yeah.
Okay, that's the old remedy for diarrhea and all that kind of stuff. Morphine is the main operative term and that stuff. So I know guys that would have gotten those bottles for a quid, from behind the counter, or have a problem with the bowels, but actually what they're doing is take the whole thing, just knock it back. So,
Isn't there people, alcoholics that drink hand sanitizer?
And you ever run into Russell?
yeah, oh yeah. So, and there's people that would venture into methylated spirits and stuff like that. Now, the problem with methylated spirits is that can make you go blind because that's wood alcohol. And wood alcohol will make you go blind.
Yeah.
And that's not reversible either.
The way before COVID, I remember them down in the Royal Hospital and they had to take the things off the wall because that's what we're doing.
I drink it.
No, so it's bonkers as well. So,
So when you see
yeah.
that when it turned into eventually into inferior, was Jesus still there on earth? Or was that after? You know what I mean?
oh, there would have been certainly strong drink, as it would have been termed, and that was alcoholic stuff.
Explain again why it's non-alcoholic source, it isn't it? If people throw things up at you, you can say, well, it's known in the Bible that you don't have the groups or not
Yeah.
alcoholic, so what's the?
Has to be ferment, has to ferment, right,
Yeah.
it has to sit
Yes,
around.
it has to sit for a period of time. When the grapes are crushed and you make your initial wine, there's not one drip of alcohol in it. It has to then go and sit, and usually what they do is they would add yeast to it or add some sort of a catalyst to get the thing going quicker, so.
But when it, who was it that got their father drunk and slept with them?
That's lots of dollars.
Yeah.
Well, that was obviously alcoholic.
Yeah, sure.
And Noah's son.
I know it's
Yeah, Noah planted the vineyard. And that-
Yeah.
So, but,
You know, it's not all said.
alcohol has been around from time immemorial,
Right.
so, yeah, it's been around forever.
But then stories are sinful, you see that's
Yeah.
the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a good point, because when you look at the Bible and you look at any of the occasions when drink is introduced in that fashion, it is always in a bad sense, and quite often it's used in a sexual sense. It exploits sexual promiscuity and all kinds of things.
You have it with Aaron's sons and
The prostitutes and the,
no,
not that part, but they were,
they brought the false fire,
yes.
and then Moses said they were not to touch alcohol.
Mhm.
Yeah, word and fair,
Yeah,
the Christ, he make the wine strong.
no,
No, all right, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Both
no,
types
so
of-
we'll get there. So we're slowly
Yeah.
getting through this situation. Okay, now, what Jesus then does is he instructs that the water pots, these water pots that are used for purification, like for foot washing and all that kind of stuff. These were big stone pots, that were 20, 30 gallons each. So, they would have been sort of on height, that big wide, that kind of thing. And it says that those pots were filled to the brim. So that's a very, very important detail, because you could not tamper with anything that was full to the neck. So, and it was pure water too. And because these things were used for purification, sometimes we look at that and say, well, it was used for feet and that kind of thing. What was it not? Well, you didn't stick your foot in it, So, the water would have been brought from a spring, and then they would have poured the water, So they filled these things up to the top so that you could not interfere with it. So you couldn't add something to it. You couldn't sort of go, all right, and dump something in there and then fill it. Oh, there's wine in there. Well, fancy that. So this was just water, and it couldn't be tampered with.
But so often when you're reading the Bible, see the way you were bringing out there about filled to the brim.
Yeah.
It just, and there's a load of different things like that in the Bible we say, and so you just go over and not everything about that until you bring that out.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or is it?
That's where just making coincidences there, obviously, to the point.
Mhm. Yep. So, I know. So like I say here, it's not possible for the water.
Could that be Kevin?
Yeah.
Could be Kevin.
Okay, Dan, could you, unless you have a comment, can you mute yourselves with a little bit of feedback? So, right. Now, the change happened in the transition, because the water wasn't turned into wine in the pot. The servants dipped out, and they were instructed to take this to the master of the feast. Now, they had a lot of faith to do this, because what they were doing was they were bringing water to the master of the feast. Now, that was going to be a bit of a tight call, So they took this, and as they were going, Jesus turned it into wine. So it wasn't turned into wine in the pot. It was just water. So they dipped it and then walked over to the master of the feast and says, here. So they, in obedience to Jesus, did what they needed to do. Mary says, whatever he says to you, do it.
Because the master of the feast of would he have been cross if it was just water?
Oh, absolutely. He would have been like, what are you, because he would have probably gathered at this particular stage that the amount of wine would start to go downhill here.
So the servers knew that, but yet they
Yeah.
had faith
Yeah.
that Jesus was
Yeah.
going to do something about it.
So, because, at the end of the day, what Jesus is doing is manifesting his glory, and people believe, so, it's not just the disciples that are believing. There's other people, and I would say especially the servants, and I think this is nice because Jesus is actually utilizing and ministering to the servants. Sees them as important. It's not about, the man up front.
And these could be the first Christian.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So, It was the best wine ever because Jesus always does the best. Because the man, the master of the feast, he says, why was this wine not given out first? Because, usually it's the best wine first and then the inferior.
Would he have eventually known then that Jesus did a miracle?
Yes, I think he would have eventually caught on, but really, as the Bible says, but the servants knew. Servants knew. So, and I think that, again, that's a wonderful thing to think about, is that Jesus wants common people to know what he's doing. He wants them to get it. Yeah. So, when we have our quiet times, when we're engaging with God, God's sitting with us at our quiet time, and he says, I want to tell you something. And he whispers something into your mind, and you've never ever heard it before in your life. And it's a revelation, but God gave it to you. Nobody else. God sat with you and says, I'm going to give you a piece of revelation to you. Now, it won't be it wouldn't be contrary to what God's saying or any of that kind of stuff, and God's not going to reveal to you something that's just completely bizarre, but he'll say something, reveal something to you that sits with you, ministers to you, makes sense to you. So, and you might share that with somebody, and they might think your head's cracked, but I'm not sure. So now, let's talk about fermentation, okay? So fermentation is the process of the production of alcohol, okay? So this is where you take fruit and you add a catalyst to it, yeast or some sort of a thing, and what that does is it starts a process where alcohol is then developed, and alcohol then, when ingested, creates certain sort of scenarios in one's mind. But fermentation is actually a death process because it starts coming as things start to rot, as things start to decay. Now, in light of that, I don't believe Jesus would then instigate a death process. He would be instigating a life process. So Jesus as creator would not do that. He would not instigate a death process, but a life process. Grapes or fruit is usually the end of the cycle of life, because what do you start off with a plant? Seed. Okay, seed then grows into thing, then plant, and plant then puts out solar panels called leaves. And and actually the fruit that comes from a plant, if a plant had its own mind, if a plant had its own sort of desires, a plant wouldn't produce fruit, because the production of fruit is a very cost-intensive, resource-intensive exercise for the plant, because it doesn't give anything back to the plant. See, whereas when you produce leaves and those go out to the sun, they're big solar panels, because the light from the sun impacts on the leaves and impacts the chlorophyll that's in the leaves and starts this process. And I've actually seen this under a microscope. It's really interesting, where you see the light as it impacts the chlorophyll, which is these little green things inside plants, and that's what makes plants green. And they're little round balls, and the light makes the ball move, and as it moves, it creates carbon dioxide, which is food for the plant. Now, you know what we breathe? We breathe oxygen. The waste product that comes from a plant is oxygen. The waste product that comes from us is carbon dioxide. So we're all feeding each other.
Yeah.
Okay. So God designed it that way, you know. So the plant's food is carbon dioxide. So, but if there's no animal out there to go and breathe carbon dioxide, well, it generates its own, but it needs light to do that. So the light from the sun impacts the chlorophyll, which starts to move around, and it creates this chemical process that generates carbon dioxide for the plant, and then the plant is getting fed, and it's like, happy days, I'm alive, great. So, you know, why would I want to make a fruit? You know, because, you know, the fruit doesn't do anything for me. But God designed the fruit there because what does the fruit have in it? Seeds, which means the plant then propagates.
You see, whenever you're saying that, that just blew my mind, because Jesus claimed to be the light of the world, so he is the light that shines into us.
Yep.
That creates the life in us.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So, yeah, you see, you know, when God reveals those sorts of things to you, you walk out of here going,
yeah,
that's amazing. You know, people say there's no God. I get that. So, I believe that for 11 years now. But so now Jesus creates a process that will benefit his creation and hence promote propagation and growth in life. So Jesus in this whole thing here is not going to promote something that promotes death. Yeah. So from the fruit come seeds, which continue the process. Now, alcohol is a result of a death process, decomposition and death, and all forms of decay and death came as a result of sin and
That's so true.
Yeah.
We're just trying to do
yeah. So, you know, there was a time when I was a Christian where I drank because I felt that's okay. What's the problem? You know, so I used to go and drink with my dad, and I used to drink with my brother, and I didn't drink excessively, but
socializing.
I always had a problem with it though. There was always something about it that just to me was just that bit dodgy, you know. And I think I've told you the story when I was working at the Catholic school. The guy, there was a parent that I was quite friendly with, and he and I like talking computers and stuff and cars, and he says, "Hey, why don't you come over to the house and bring a case of beer with you, and we'll sit and we'll talk about computers and we can drink and stuff and that." So I looked at that as an opportunity for the gospel.
Yes.
I thought, right, I'll go and get some beer, and then I'll go and sit and tell the guy how to get saved and all that kind of stuff. But I remember going into the off license to go because I didn't drink Budweiser or anything, rubbish beer. I was like, I drink premium proper stuff, but I remember going into an off license that wasn't anywhere near where I lived, so nobody knew, who I was.
That's your conscience.
Yes, and so I remember going into the off license, and I was going from the car to the place, and I nearly ran, just like, and then you go into the door, and you're going, right, I've never been. And so and you're walking around like this, hoping that nobody sees you, and then you grab your throw it on the counter and say, right this way, I don't care about the change, and you get out, and then you're sitting in the car, and then you get down to your man's house, you have your beer there, and it's like, okay, share the gospel with him. And we sit down and we're talking about computers and drinking beer, and God was outside the door somewhere, and I had to share one piece of gospel with him.
It reminds me of whenever I need gravy, no wine for your gravy. I wouldn't go in to buy a wee small bottle. I wouldn't go into Bambush because anybody see me in that department. I would have loved to hear it.
I know it's desperate. So,
And I was doing no harm. It was just putting a wee bit of red wine into your gravy to taste it.
yeah, and when in the cooking process, just to put everybody's fears, it's not a problem using wine and cooking because the alcohol goes woo, it flies out, so it disappears. But anyway, it's one of these things where, you know, you don't do things to cause your brother to stumble, you know, so just leave it, you know.
Well,
So,
I went to a wedding party and it was, you know, that cobbler, you know, that cider, you know, that. That's it, even.
I know.
And so my son bought me it. And I thought, oh, like cider, it's fine. And this fella cut silage at our house said to me, "Are you serious? This you were a Christian." And I thought, never again.
yeah, I know.
But it's coming from not being saved and like it's okay, you know, going to mass, 6 o'clock, getting your piece of God, and then going out and then drinking and earning up all sorts, whatever time, you know, now you're a Christian, it's just, it's a no, just.
But the best person to ask how to live a Christian life is an unsaved person, because they'll tell you how to live it.
Yeah.
The
So,
things that you didn't do.
Exactly.
Keep away from it, don't go backwards.
so,
And I've met people over the years who would say, well, there's nothing wrong with having a drink, but if they saw the mentor, the pastor of this church
Yeah.
in a bar,
Yeah.
they would be the first people to complain about it.
no,
Exactly.
Well, they can't, they think that they're all right by doing it,
Yeah.
but they're, at the same time, they're watching everybody else around.
they're watching you like hawks,
Yeah,
you know,
Your
so.
credibility's completely shot.
But then you take this and says, you know, why would Jesus make 120 gallons of alcohol to promote death? You know, for Jesus to actually create something that would kill
It's great.
people, kill the creation, why would he do that? You know, why would he create something, you know, 120, this is what it amounted to be, 120 gallons of booze that would just put people clean off their rubber. You know, it just doesn't make any sense.
Cause people to sin even more.
Yeah, because what alcohol does is it takes the lid off your head and the inhibitions, and then you go and do things that you never would have done before when you were sober.
Well, it is,
But
it's spirits, you're inviting spirits in.
Yeah.
and they're going in
Yeah,
there.
they don't call it spirits for nothing. So,
Isn't it amazing about how people can, who know absolutely nothing about the Bible, but somewhere along the line they've heard this, that Jesus made turned water into
Yeah.
wine.
Yeah.
And they'll quote that to you, but they'll.
Not
They
going
don't
out
seem to
Yeah,
see
they won't-
the
they won't
other
quote
thing
anything
where
else,
Jesus
is there?
said you're not allowed to do this, this,
Yeah.
this, and this,
yeah.
Yeah.
because that would interfere with
That's it.
what they're doing.
Very
So in Jesus is life and fruit bearing when we abide in him. So now next week, when we talk about the Jesus being the true vine, we'll get into a lot more of what that's about. So, yep, that's,
So it was 120 gallons that he actually changed from water into wine, that's the amount?
so because there were 6 water pots, so you multiply 6 times 20, which would be 120, or if it was 30 gallons, then it talked about 180 gallons.
Right.
So,
And another wee thing, I wasn't on the ball at this time, but I was trying to keep my mouth shut, but it's impossible. Do you see there, whenever you said God said 3 times it was good? What day was that?
he said 2 times it was good, that was on the 3rd day,
The
which was.
3rd day?
Yeah, which was Tuesday.
Right, thank you.
So anyway, so that is the, that particular sign. So, but I think what we'll do next week when we talk about Jesus being the true vine, and we'll pull this together and kind of wrap it up, you know, and then we'll move on to the next one, which is the
It's wonderful to think, you know, that plant and the seed and just the same thing that happens to us with life. Like, that's what I took away from that today.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely amazing.
anyway.
I remember having the garden and it was a lot of